Hello, and welcome to Will's Infinite Library. I'm Will, and this is my Infinite Library. I found my other Got Books shirt. This was the original Got Books shirt from the Green Valley Book Fair, which it says on this one, the other one doesn't. So here's the more, I guess, traditional colored one. The other one's like really bright colored from the last video. So it's been a while since my last video, which I think was beginning of this year. And I wanted to kind of give you an update on where I've been and in terms of reading, not physically, because physically I've just been here. But as I explained in my last video, I have been reading Aristotle and Dante Dive into the Waters of the World. And I've been reading this in Portuguese as kind of a way to study Portuguese and to incorporate it into my daily life, into something that I enjoy, which is reading. So it becomes more natural. It was hard to find a book that was at the level that it was interesting, but still easy enough for me to read. So this one was perfect because it is written in a kind of simple prose, but still kind of poetic. So it's interesting, it's well written, but the language itself is more simple. So it's easy to digest if you're reading in a different language. And I definitely, obviously read the first book a while ago. So I was curious to check this one out. And I finally made it through it after all this time. It took me a good month and a half, I think, about to read it all. I read much slower than I can read in English, of course. It just took me longer. I had to look things up. But it was a great experience overall. I'm glad I did it, and I will not be doing it again anytime soon. The book itself is really cool. It continues the story of Aristotle and Dante, obviously. And I think the thing that I enjoyed most about it was this kind of, I guess, extended metaphor about creating a map of your life, creating a map of the world, and charting out new experiences, yourself, who you're becoming, other people in your life, and putting them on the map and trying to make sense of the world through this kind of metaphor of connecting places and connecting people and looking at them all in that perspective. And I like big metaphors like that run throughout the length of the book, because I think they really help you try to connect the dots in your own life. And a lot of times, like, life itself is so complicated that it's hard to really wrap your mind around things, to compare things, to compartmentalize things. And this metaphor was the author and the character's way of doing that in the lives of the characters in the book. And I found that really cool. And of course, like I said, the book itself was fun and pretty easy to read and goes pretty quick because of the way it's written, the style, but also it's really interesting and really well written and thoughtful, emotional. It takes a lot of time to slow down and explore thoughts and emotions and feelings. It's actually very slow and thoughtful, I would say, which I think is in line with the first book. So if you've read that, you will know what to expect. The other thing about it, though, is that, of course, I came for Aristotle and Dante. It's the title of the book. It's what the characters we loved in the first book. And I followed them along, was really enjoying it. And then I slowed down, I think like halfway through the book or so. The characters kind of, maybe further than that, but the characters kind of go their separate ways for a bit. And it's interesting and it's realistic because they're trying to, like, they're kids, right? Like, they're trying to navigate life. They're trying to figure out who they are. And doing that, it's hard when you're in a relationship, especially at a young age, to know who you are and what you want. And so they go their separate ways, kind of. And they, not a spoiler alert, I'm not saying how it ends, but they, they're trying to figure out who they are on their own as individual people. And because of that, there are parts of the book where they are focused on themselves, and it's not about that relationship between these two characters, which is what I came to the book for. So I found that to slow me down a bit and kind of throw me off a bit. And I think, like I said, it is realistic and well done, and I think it makes sense for the characters that that's what happened and we follow them there. So it's not a criticism at all. It's just that's just kind of how my experience with the book was, is that I was into the relationship and then things kind of went in a different direction and I was not like, it wasn't what I expected. So it slowed my reading down. I wasn't as into it for a while, but then I picked back up and I was interested in the new stories. But it's kind of the same thing that happens in books with multiple characters that shift perspectives. That's not what's happening here really, but the same kind of idea where it's just such a shift that you have to kind of like get into it all over again. And that really takes me out of a book when that happens. Yeah, so that's Aristotle and Dante dive into the waters of the world. And oh, I wanted to mention that, like I kind of alluded in my last video, that I thought I wasn't super confident that I would get all the way through this book, or I didn't know how long it would take me, and that I thought I might either cheat in my idea to focus only on this book and get it read, or I might fall off or something. So I found a loophole. And the loophole was, I remembered that short stories exist. So I could still focus on reading this book, but also read some short stories while reading it without feeling like I was betraying it by picking up another novel. So I read this book, Best Canadian Stories 2021. This is a collection that Biblioasis Press in Ontario puts together every year. They do 3 volumes: Best Stories of the Year, Best Nonfiction of the Year, and Best Poetry of the Year. And so this was the fiction collection from last year. And I found it really interesting because I also read a collection of Best American Stories of the Year. And they felt very timeless and well written and good stories, of course. But the Best Canadian Stories was really different in that it was more like a product of its times. Like, I feel like there's this hesitance in art to look at where we are right now because it's so complicated, like life in the pandemic and the world and all of that. It's like, it's too close to us that we can't look on it objectively yet. But this book does that. Like, there's even a story that's clearly about COVID and other stories that are about like current events and things that are going on now. And so it feels too soon in some ways, but I also really liked that. Like, it was kind of a breath of fresh air. It was kind of a breath of fresh air, not to ignore that and to face that reality of where the world is today. So I really liked that it did that. It feels very raw in that sense, because I don't know if we are ready to talk about these things, but we also need to, I think. So I'm really glad that Diane, who is the editor of this collection, chose to focus on those kind of stories. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting about this collection is that CanLit gets such a, I don't know if a bad rap is the right word, but it's debated, like, what even is CanLit? Is it, what makes a book or a work Canadian? And she says some really great things in her introduction to this book, that she took a really broad lens because the experience is vast, especially in this globalized world of anyone from any country, but especially Canada. So she chose to focus on stories that were written by Canadians, and that could mean people who were born in Canada and moved away, people who were born in Canada and still live here, people who were born somewhere else and moved to Canada, or otherwise spent a long portion of their life that impacted them and their viewpoints in Canada. And that's how she chose to define this. So she didn't say like, oh, only people who were born here and live here can be in this collection. No, she took a broader view, which I thought was really cool as well. And then the other book, I haven't read much of it yet, but I wanted to share with you, since I was getting into short stories, that I wanted to share with you was this book that I discovered called Black Water, the Anthology of Fantastic Literature, which is collected by Alberto Manguel, who is a Argentinian scholar, I think, of kind of books in general. Like, he wrote a lot about libraries and stories and fiction and the act of reading, and like kind of scholarly articles about what reading is and why it's important. Some really cool stuff that I would highly recommend if you're interested in that kind of like meta experience of books. But anyway, I found out about this collection as I was reading up on him, and that it collects stories from tons of writers, like big names that you've heard of and other ones you haven't. It has writers like Tennessee Williams, Edith Wharton, Graham Greene, Charles Dickens, Jules Verne, Edgar Allan Poe. The list goes on and on. Ursula Le Guin, Oscar Wilde. So kind of these like literary greats, some known for genre fiction, a lot not. But the stories in this book are focused on what he calls the fantastic, which are things that are not necessarily straight up speculative fiction, but they have weird elements. I think now we would call this fabulist fiction or even magical realism. And it's just a really cool collection that I wanted to pick up because I don't think I'm just going to read straight through it, but it's a book that I think I'll refer to over the years when I want to read these kind of stories and when I want to learn more and experience new writers or writers that I know in one context and read their more weird stuff. So this was right up my alley. I was really excited to pick this up. It was hard to find. It's really expensive if you can find a copy. For a decent price, snatch it up. I ended up getting this one for like 20 bucks or something, which isn't bad, but it's like very used, and I had to order from the UK because that's the only place I could find it. But I saw copies, the easily available copies selling for like hundreds of dollars. So yikes. But you can probably find a lot of the stories other places because it is a collection. But that's just a really cool place where you can find a bunch of stories all in one place. So those are kind of the short stories that have been occupying my mind while I read novels. Then I did read one more novel since reading Aristotle and Dante. I'm back to reading in English now, so this one went much quicker. The next book that I read was, the quality's not very good on my screen, but Under the Whispering Door by T.J. Klune. This book has been on my radar since I read The House in the Cerulean Sea because I really enjoyed that. But I read the description of Under the Whispering Door and I wasn't really intrigued, honestly. Like, it kind of takes place in the afterlife and the main character, Wallace, meeting a ferryman who's supposed to guide him from death to the next, we don't know what, to the next, not life, maybe life, we don't know again, to the next part of his existence. And to me, that just sounded kind of like when I talked about demons before, like this kind of like very played out story that I'd heard a million times using like an existing mythology. And I did really enjoy House in the Cerulean Sea, so I was confident that I would enjoy it, but I thought the themes might kind of drag down my experience with it as something that just wasn't quite for me. But I was wrong. I really enjoyed this book a lot, maybe even more than The House in the Cerulean Sea when it comes down to it. But I think I need to kind of sit on it and I digest it a little bit more before I really can kind of understand how it sits with me. I think the main thing is the vibe is really good. Like, it's pretty humorous, though it gets really dark at times, darker than House on the Cerulean Sea. And like quite dark, like dealing with really heavy things, dealing with depression and anxiety, dealing with suicide, death and grief, and all of these things. And I think maybe that's part of why I really liked it, because I love books or stories or any kind of like philosophies, almost even about that deal with really heavy, intense subjects that we have to talk about and often get ignored in day-to-day life, but looks at them with kind of a perspective of humility and even humor, and finding ways to kind of laugh despite the terrible things that happen to us. And it makes the characters feel so real and relatable. The main character, Wallace, is a terrible, terrible person. And in reading the first chapter, he's still alive and getting a sense of who he is. I was like, oh, I don't think I'm gonna like this book again. Like, I was like, he's awful and I don't really want to spend time with him. But he quickly kind of opens up to new experiences in death, and the people he meets really change him it's not like a quick overnight, like he wakes up dead one day and is a good person. It's not like that at all either. It's like all of these experiences with people who kind of see him and don't treat him, I guess, with preconceived notions. Like they treat him like he's dead and he had a kind of crappy life, a lot by his own doing, and they treat him like anyone else. Like they don't let him off the hook for what he did, but they also don't like banish him to hell. They treat him like a normal person. And I think that kind of can facilitate him to change, but also, I don't know, it just felt really realistic, I guess is the word I'm looking for, in a lot of ways. The interactions with Wallace, the ferryman Hugo, and the other characters that he meets in the afterlife, in this weird kind of house, and it becomes this, it's kind of like charming, like House in the Cerulean Sea, even when it's dark. But it's kind of this found family, which is also a thing that was great in that book. So I think that's what really comes through as the common thread here. And also that kind of tone of being humorous, but dealing with harder issues. And I'd say this one leans a bit, it starts off like very much feeling like a comedy, but towards the end it gets really dark and heavy, but still maintains some levity between the tough moments. But it does have a pretty stark shift that makes it not feel like a comedy throughout. And I think I really like that as well, because it's not just like one side, right? And like, because life is like that. Like there's good and bad to most things that happen in our lives. And we can choose to look at one or the other and be overly optimistic or overly pessimistic, or we can kind of take both as they come and realize that there are two sides, and that is life. I think that's all I have to say about that one for now. So that's what I've been reading. I would love to hear from you. What have you been reading? Or what are you looking forward to? I don't know, honestly, what I'm going to pick up next. I've been kind of skimming through some things and not getting into them. I think the Under the Whispering Door was like one of the surprise reads to me that I thought I would kind of feel medium about, but I really enjoyed. And I'm struggling to find something that I think will stand up to that. So I'm struggling to find something that I really want to read next. So let me know if you have any good recommendations. I'll just keep browsing Goodreads for now and see if I can find something to talk about next time. But I have some other ideas for some videos that I might do in the meantime. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me here, and I look forward to chatting more books with you as always. Thanks again for stopping by. See you next time.